I'm Deborah, and I was born into what seemed like a perfect family. My dad worked as an engineer at a local factory, bringing home a good paycheck. Mom stayed at home, taking care of the house. Those early years were happy ones, filled with laughter and love. I remember Dad coming home from work, his face lighting up when he saw me. "There's my little princess," he'd say, scooping me up in his strong arms. Mom would smile, watching us from the kitchen doorway. But life has a way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them. I was 7 when everything changed. It started on a regular Tuesday. Dad came home from work looking pale and sweaty. I watched from the stairs as he slumped onto the couch, rubbing his chest. "Maybe you should see a doctor," Mom suggested. Dad shook his head. "Nah, it'll pass. Don't fuss, Sarah." That evening, as we sat down for dinner, Dad suddenly clutched his chest and fell from his chair. Mom screamed, rushing to his side. "Deborah, call 911!" she yelled, her voice shrill with panic. With shaking hands, I dialed the number, telling the operator what happened. The wait for the ambulance felt like an eternity. The next few days were a blur of hospital visits and hushed conversations. Words like heart attack and permanent damage floated around, their meaning lost on my young mind. When Dad finally came home, he wasn't the same. He couldn't work at the factory anymore. Instead, he got a new job in an office, but it didn't pay nearly as well. That's when the fighting started. "We can't afford this, Sarah," Dad would shout, waving bills in the air. "Well, what do you expect me to do about it?" Mom would snap back. "I'm not going to work. That's your job." I'd hide in my room, pillow over my ears, trying to drown out their angry voices. One night, I overheard Mom on the phone with Dad's parents. "You need to help us," she was saying. "We're struggling here." But Grandma and Grandpa weren't having it. "You've got insurance money," Grandma said, her voice crackling through the speaker. "And it's about time you started working too, Sarah. You can't expect John to do it all, especially now." Mom slammed the phone down, muttering under her breath. The fights got worse after that. Mom kept demanding more money, and Dad kept saying we didn't have it. I watched helplessly as Dad grew paler and more tired each day. 3 years after his first heart attack, Dad had another one. This time, he didn't make it. I was 10 years old when I lost my father. After Dad's funeral, things changed fast. I overheard heated arguments between Mom and my grandparents, words flying like daggers. "You're taking everything for yourself," Grandma accused, her voice trembling with anger. "What about Deborah?" John wanted her to be taken care of. Mom's reply was cold. "I'm her mother. I'll decide what's best for her." I didn't understand then what they were fighting about. Money, inheritance, embezzlement. These were just big words to me. All I knew was that Mom seemed different, harder somehow. Before I could make sense of it all, Mom dropped another bombshell. "Deborah, I'm getting married again," she announced one day, not even looking at me as she applied her lipstick. The wedding was a blur. Mom looked happy, but I felt lost. Her new husband, Tom, barely acknowledged me. It didn't take long for me to realize I wasn't part of their plans. One morning, Mom sat me down. "Deborah, you're going to stay with Grandma and Grandpa for a while." "But why?" I asked, fighting back tears. "Tom and I need some time to ourselves," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. And just like that, I was shipped off to my grandparents' house. It was big and luxurious, nothing like our old home. Grandma and Grandpa were kind, always making sure I had everything I needed. But despite their love, I missed Mom terribly. Months passed. I settled into a routine with my grandparents, finding comfort in their steady presence. But a part of me always hoped Mom would come back for me. Then, out of the blue, she did. "Deborah, pack your bags. You're coming home," Mom said during one of her rare visits. My heart soared. She missed me. She wanted me back. I hugged Grandma and Grandpa goodbye, promising to visit often. But my joy was short-lived. As soon as we got home, I realized why Mom had really brought me back. "This is your baby brother, Jake," she said, handing me a squirming bundle. "You'll be helping me take care of him." Reality hit hard. I wasn't brought back because Mom missed me. I was brought back to be a nanny. My days became a blur of school, chores, and babysitting. While Mom went out with Tom or met her friends, I was left to watch Jake. Homework became an afterthought. Between changing diapers and cleaning the house, there was little time for studying. One evening, as I struggled to calm a colicky Jake while trying to finish a book report, Tom came home early. "Where's your mother?" he asked, frowning at the mess in the living room. "She went out with her friends," I mumbled, bouncing Jake on my hip. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I'll take him. You try to clean up a bit." As I picked up toys and wiped down surfaces, I couldn't help but wonder, was this what family was supposed to be like? An absent mother, a distant stepfather, and a child forced to grow up too fast? My life as a makeshift nanny took its toll. I was exhausted all the time, falling asleep in class and forgetting assignments. It didn't take long for my teachers to notice. One day, Mrs. Thompson, my English teacher, pulled me aside after class. "Deborah, is everything okay at home?" she asked, her eyes full of concern. I mumbled something about being tired, but Mrs. Thompson wasn't buying it. A week later, I found out she'd called Grandma, and Grandma, in turn, called Mom. After a heated argument, Mom slammed the phone down and turned to me. "Pack your bags," she said coldly. "You're going back to your grandparents." I was torn between relief and hurt. Part of me was glad to escape the endless chores and babysitting, but another part felt rejected all over again. Life at Grandma and Grandpa's was like before, stable, loving, and focused on my well-being. My grades started to improve, and I felt like a kid again. Months passed with barely a word from Mom. Then, out of the blue, Grandma got another call. "Sarah's divorced Tom," Grandma told me later, her voice a mix of surprise and disappointment. "He's taken Jake and moved to another city." I felt a pang of sadness for my little brother, but also a strange sense of relief. At least he was with his dad, who seemed to care more than Mom ever did. That's when Mom discovered social media. Suddenly, my phone was buzzing with notifications. Mom was posting constantly, selfies at clubs, pictures of fancy meals, and lots of photos with a guy who looked barely older, over 18 years old. But it wasn't just new boyfriends Mom was experimenting with. Soon, her posts took a different turn. "Just got my new girls," read one post, accompanied by a photo of Mom in a tight top, her chest suddenly much larger than I remembered. The surgeries didn't stop there. Every few months, there'd be a new post about another procedure. Bigger hips, plumper lips. Even her eyes looked different. I watched from afar as Mom transformed herself, post by post, surgery by surgery. The woman in the photos looked nothing like the mother I remembered. It was like watching a stranger play dress-up with my mom's life. Through all of this, Mom never once asked about me. No calls on my birthday. No messages asking how school was going. Nothing. At first, it hurt. I'd cry myself to sleep, wondering why I wasn't enough for her. But as time passed, the pain dulled. I stopped expecting her calls, stopped hoping she'd suddenly remember she had a daughter. The years flew by faster than I could have imagined. Before I knew it, I was standing on the stage in my cap and gown, accepting my high school diploma. Grandma and Grandpa cheered louder than anyone else in the audience. Mom wasn't there, but I'd stopped expecting her to show up long ago. Thanks to my grandparents' generosity, I headed off to college that fall. They insisted on paying for everything, waving away my protests. "Your education is the best investment we could make," Grandma said firmly. "Just focus on your studies." And I did. College was challenging, exciting, and everything I'd hoped for. I made new friends, discovered my passion for marketing, and for the first time in my life, felt like I was truly becoming my own person. 4 years later, I graduated with honors and landed a job at a local advertising firm. The day I got my first paycheck, I knew what I had to do. "I'm moving out," I told Grandma and Grandpa over dinner. "I found an apartment I can afford." They exchanged a look I couldn't quite read. "Are you sure, Deborah?" Grandma asked. You know you're always welcome here." "I'm sure," I said, squeezing her hand. "It's time for me to stand on my own 2 feet, but I'll visit all the time, I promise." Life settled into a new rhythm. Work was challenging but rewarding, and I was slowly building a life for myself. But as I was flourishing, my grandparents were fading. It started with little things. Grandpa forgetting where he put his glasses, Grandma getting tired more easily. Then came the doctor's appointments, the concerned looks, the hushed phone calls. I spent every free moment with them, trying to repay a fraction of the love and care they'd given me. Weekends were filled with quiet afternoons watching old movies, or just sitting and talking. One chilly autumn morning, I got the call I'd been dreading. Grandpa had passed away in his sleep. The next few days were a blur of funeral arrangements and tearful relatives. Through it all, Grandma was a pillar of strength, but I could see the light had gone out of her eyes. Grandma didn't last long after Grandpa died. It was like she'd lost her will to go on without him. 3 months later, I was planning another funeral. As I was going through Grandma's address book, I found Mom's number and, against my better judgment, sent a text. "Grandma's funeral is tomorrow. It would mean a lot if you came." The reply came hours later. "Sorry, can't make it." Those people were practically strangers to me anyway. Those people, my grandparents, the ones who'd raised me, loved me, supported me. Strangers to her? I deleted her number right then and there. After the funeral, the lawyer called me in to read the will. I sat in his office, feeling numb, as he explained that Grandma and Grandpa had left me everything. Their house, their savings, all of it. "It's a considerable sum," the lawyer said gently. "They wanted to make sure you were taken care of?" I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. Even in death, they were still looking out for me. As I left the lawyer's office, clutching the paperwork, I felt a strange mix of grief and gratitude. I'd lost the 2 people who'd been my rock for so long, but their final gift meant I'd never have to worry about financial security again. The task of sorting through my grandparents' belongings was both emotionally draining and strangely cathartic. Each object held a memory, a piece of the life we'd shared. I worked my way through the house, room by room, until I reached Grandpa's study. His desk was a treasure trove of old documents, each neatly filed away. As I sifted through them, a yellowed envelope caught my eye. My heart skipped a beat when I saw my father's handwriting. With trembling hands, I opened it. It was Dad's will, dated just before he died. As I read, my vision blurred with tears. To my dear Sarah, it read, "I leave the bulk of our savings. But I ask that a portion be set aside for Deborah's college education. Our daughter's future is important, and I want to ensure she has the best opportunities possible." The paper crumpled in my fist as a wave of anger washed over me. Mom had known all along. She'd had money specifically meant for my education, money Dad had wanted me to have, and she'd kept it all for herself. Suddenly, all those arguments I'd overheard as a child made sense. Grandma and Grandpa accusing Mom of embezzlement, of taking everything for herself. They'd been right. For a moment, I considered calling Mom, demanding an explanation. But what good would it do? She'd made her choices long ago. I decided then and there to let it go. I had a good life, a future ahead of me. I didn't need to dredge up old hurts. Little did I know, the past wasn't done with me yet. A few weeks later, as I was leaving work, my phone rang. I almost dropped it when I saw the caller ID. Mom. "Hello?" I answered, my voice uncertain. "Deborah?" It's your mother." I waited, not sure what to say. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," she continued, her voice sounding different than I remembered. "I miss you, sweetheart. I want us to try and fix things between us. Can we meet?" I was speechless. After years of silence, this was the last thing I expected. "Okay," I said finally. "Let's meet." We agreed on a cafe near my office for the following Saturday. When I walked into the cafe, I almost didn't recognize her. The woman waving at me from a corner table looked nothing like the mother I remembered. Her face was taut and unnaturally smooth, her lips plump, her cheekbones sharp enough to cut glass. Years of surgeries had transformed her into someone I might have passed on the street without a second glance. We ordered coffee, and for a while, we made awkward small talk. She asked about my job. I asked about her life. It felt surreal, like I was having lunch with a stranger who happened to know details about my childhood. Finally, she reached across the table and took my hand. "Deborah, I owe you an apology. Many apologies, actually. I haven't been a good mother to you." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. "After your father died, I was lost. I made a lot of mistakes. I pushed you away when I should have held you close. Can you ever forgive me?" I looked at this woman, this stranger with my mother's eyes, and felt a complex swirl of emotions. Part of me wanted to scream at her, to demand explanations for years of neglect, for the money she'd kept from me. But another part, a part I thought had died long ago, just wanted my mom back. "I don't know," I said honestly. "It's been a long time, Mom. A lot has happened." She nodded, looking down at her coffee. "I understand, but I want to try, if you'll let me. I've missed so much of your life. I want to be part of it again, if you'll have me." The next few weeks were surreal. Mom and I met for coffee, went shopping, and even had dinner together a couple of times. It felt strange, like trying on an old sweater that didn't quite fit anymore, but I was cautiously optimistic. One afternoon, as we were finishing up lunch, Mom casually asked, "So, sweetie, did your grandparents leave you anything?" The question caught me off guard. Yeah," I replied hesitantly. "They left me their house and some savings." Mom's eyes lit up in a way that made me uneasy. "Oh, that's wonderful. You know, I've been meaning to ask you a favor." She leaned in, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "I'm getting married again, to Daniel. You remember him, right? He's 16 years younger than me. We want to have a bachelorette party, and I was wondering if we could use your grandparents' house. It's such a lovely place for a celebration." I blinked, trying to process this information. "You're getting married? Again?" She waved her hand dismissively. "Third time's the charm, right? So, about the house?" Against my better judgment, I agreed. "Sure, I guess that would be okay." Mom clapped her hands in delight. "Oh, thank you, darling. You won't regret this." The next day, she came to pick up the keys. "I'll give them back at the wedding," she said, handing me an ornate invitation. "1 month from today. I can't wait for you to be there." As I watched her drive away, I felt a mix of emotions. Part of me was happy that Mom wanted me at her wedding. Another part couldn't shake a nagging sense of unease. The weeks flew by, and I was busy with work and my own life. But as the wedding approached, I decided to check on the house, make sure everything was in order for Mom's party. As I pulled up to the curb, I noticed unfamiliar cars in the driveway. Frowning, I walked up to the front door and knocked. A stranger answered. "Can I help you?" he asked, looking confused. "I'm here to check on the house," I said. "I'm the owner." The man's frown deepened. "I think there's been a mistake. My wife and I just bought this house. We're in the middle of moving in." My heart dropped. "That's impossible. This house belongs to me. I inherited it from my grandparents." The man called his wife over, and they explained that they'd bought the house from a woman whose description matched my mother's new look perfectly. As the reality of the situation sank in, I felt like I couldn't breathe. Mom had done it again. She'd manipulated me, used me, all to steal my inheritance. I stumbled back to my car, my mind racing. How could she have sold the house? She didn't have the right, unless she'd forged documents. For a moment, I considered calling the police right then and there. But as the initial shock wore off, a cold anger settled in its place. No, I wouldn't go to the police. Not yet. Mom thought she'd won, that she'd pulled off her scheme without a hitch. She was expecting to celebrate her new marriage, to start her new life flush with the money from my grandparents' house. Well, she had another thing coming. The week leading up to Mom's wedding was a flurry of activity. I reached out to every relative I could think of, aunts, uncles, cousins, and told them everything: the fraudulent sale of the house, the years of neglect, the stolen college fund. To my relief, they were unanimously outraged. I outlined my plan, asking each of them to play along at the wedding, to act as if everything was normal until I gave the signal. They all agreed, eager to see justice served. The day of the wedding arrived. I dressed in a beautiful blue dress, my hair and makeup carefully done. To all outward appearances, I was the picture of a supportive daughter. The ceremony was lavish, clearly sparing no expense. My stomach churned, knowing that this extravagance was likely funded by the sale of my grandparents' home. When it came time for the reception, I waited patiently as guest after guest offered their congratulations. Finally, I approached the microphone, a serene smile plastered on my face. "I'd like to say a few words about my mother," I began, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. Then, with deliberate slowness, I reached into my purse and pulled out a white cap. The words, "My mother is a thief," blazed across it in bright red letters. I placed it on my head, and around the room, my relatives did the same. The silence was deafening. Mom's face drained of color as I continued. "Let me tell you a story," I said, my voice ringing out in the stunned quiet. A story about a woman who abandoned her child, who stole money meant for that child's education, and who, most recently, fraudulently sold a house she had no right to sell, a house left to her daughter by loving grandparents. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd. I saw Mom trying to signal me to stop, but I pressed on, recounting years of neglect and deception. And now, I concluded, she stands here, celebrating her wedding with money obtained through fraud, money stolen from her own daughter. The young groom, Daniel, turned to Mom, his face a mask of shock and disgust. "Sarah, is this true?" he demanded. Under the weight of dozens of accusing stares, Mom finally broke. "Yes," she wailed. "But I love you, Daniel. I'd do anything for you. Please, please don't leave me." She fell to her knees, clutching at Daniel's legs, mascara streaking down her face. The beautiful bride was gone, replaced by a desperate, cornered woman. The wedding reception had devolved into utter chaos. Guests were shouting, some in anger, others in disbelief. Amidst the uproar, Mom suddenly sprang to her feet, her face contorted with rage. "You ungrateful little rubbish!" she screamed at me, her voice raw with fury. "I should have aborted you when I had the chance. I wish you'd never been born." Her words hit me like a physical blow, but I stood my ground, watching as years of pent-up resentment and bitterness poured out of her. Daniel, who had been standing in shocked silence, finally found his voice. "That's enough," he said, his tone ice-cold. "Sarah, I can't believe I almost married you. You're a monster." With that, he turned on his heel and walked out, leaving Mom standing alone in her white dress, mascara streaking down her face. I took off my cap, the words "my mother is a thief" now seeming almost quaint compared to the ugly truth that had been revealed. With a final, deliberate motion, I threw it at her feet. "Goodbye, Mom," I said quietly, then turned and walked away, leaving her screaming and sobbing behind me. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of legal proceedings. I went straight to the police, filing charges against Mom for fraud and forgery. The case was solid. Between the forged documents, witness testimonies, and Mom's own confession at the wedding, there was no doubt about her guilt. In the end, justice was served. Mom was sentenced to several years in prison for her crimes. She was ordered to return the money from the fraudulent house sale and pay additional compensation for her years of deception. As I stood outside the courthouse after the final hearing, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Relief, certainly, that the truth had finally come out. Sadness for the mother I never really had. But mostly, I felt free. Free from the weight of unspoken truths and suppressed anger that I'd carried for so long. With the money from the settlement, I bought myself a cozy little house, smaller than my grandparents', but all mine. I set aside the rest for the future, thinking about the family I hope to have someday. Life settled into a new rhythm. Work was going well, I was making new friends, and for the first time in years, I felt genuinely happy and at peace. Then, out of the blue, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. "Hello?" I answered cautiously. "Deborah?" A young man's voice came through. "It's Jake, your brother." My heart skipped a beat. I hadn't heard from Jake since we were kids. "I heard about what happened with Mom," he continued. I wanted to hear your side of the story, if that's okay." We talked for hours that night. Jake had been living with his dad since the divorce, shielded from most of Mom's antics. He was shocked by what I told him, but mostly, he seemed sad that we'd lost so many years together. From that day on, Jake and I started rebuilding our relationship. We met for coffee, exchanged texts, and slowly got to know each other as adults. It wasn't always easy. We had a lot of lost time to make up for, but it was worth it. As I sit here now, looking out the window of my new home, I can't help but reflect on the journey that brought me here. It wasn't an easy road, filled with betrayal, hurt, and loss. But it also led me to strength I didn't know I had, to justice long overdue, and to a brother I thought I'd lost.